Welcome back. This week we're focusing on society and its influence on food. And it's a big topic, really hard to get our hands around in some ways because if we look at the population of the US, we have about 323 million people, all of whom eat food, all of whom buy food, and all of whom likely have some thoughts on what they buy and what they eat. And when we talk about societal influences, we're really talking about two questions. And last week we did this, we're making a distinction between political influence and political action. Here we also are making a little bit of a difference. What do we want and how do we get it? The what do we want question is what do we as a society agree is important enough to push companies to do, to push lawmakers to do, and to say, yes, we want that codified in law. We want everyone to be doing what? And again, that can be a really difficult question when you have 323 million voices, all with different ideas, coming to say one thing or another about food. The other part, how do we get it? That is a little more straightforward. We can talk about the mechanisms by which we exert our political influence, our social influence to get political results. And that's things that we're very familiar with, from call your congressman to march on DC type thing. And on the what do you want question, we can really expand our scope of discussion to look at a full range of history. This isn't the first time people have asked the question of what do we want from the food we buy at market or the food that we prepare at home. The expectations that we have from the farmers and the manufacturers now, this is a historical question. And we can go into medieval England, which obviously has an influence on our common law system, to see misdemeanor common law offenses in the Middle Ages for selling unwholesome food, the Magna Carta establishing a unified system of weights and measurements, which corresponded to an idea of a misdemeanor for cheating someone if the weights or measurements were wrong. That idea of cheating is not just unique to England, but really has its roots in antiquity. Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, everyone had something to say about the food in the marketplace, and a lot of what they had to say focused on cheating, making sure that if you were buying a certain amount of a product, you actually got that amount of product. There was also, of course, some worry about wholesomeness, making sure there wasn't rotted meat, for example. But overall, the concern was on cheating, and to some extent, the concern has been on harm. Which raises the question of what do we want today? What are the social influences that we seek to get our lawmakers, our companies to abide by and to do? And is it different in some ways from what we've talked about historically as a Greek or as someone in a medieval kingdom in England? And a clue of what we want is already codified in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and the Federal Meat Inspection Act and all the other variations of that for poultry and for pork products. We're focused on adulteration and we're focused on misbranding. At least that's what we've told our lawmakers to codify. Those are two important pieces beginning in 1906 that have carried through all the way to the Food Safety and Modernization Act. We have continued to demand those be central themes, the core violations for food safety, for food regulation. And they're not that different than the Greek, the Roman, the Egyptian, or the medieval English. Misbranding, we don't want to be cheated. Adulteration, we don't want to be harmed. We want wholesome product that's not tainted, that's not ruined in some way, that's not spoiled. And so, in a way, what we want as a society has been the same throughout all time, in a way. We have always wanted to be sure we're getting the product that is described as it is, safe to eat, in the quantity that's described. But as we know, as shoppers, we go into the grocery stores, we read product labels, and we see lots of emblems. You can turn over the back of any package and see any one of these emblems that are coming up on the screen. Organic is millions of dollars every year, along with all natural. You can get into fad diets or to trending diets like paleo and keto. GMO has been a big concern. And beyond these, you can get into things where we're trying to tell you what the product is doing for you. It's heart healthy, it's calorie-wise, it's going to help you lose weight, it's going to fortify your diet, it's It's going to give you omegas. It's not going to give you preservatives or hydrogenated oils. We're bombarded with information on our labels, and it sometimes is overwhelming. At the end of the day, you just want a cookie or you want a cook spray, and you don't need all this information. But it's there, and it's there because of some reason. And oftentimes with companies, they're doing this not for their own benefit, but because consumers are demanding it. That consumer is saying, I want this. This is my political influence. This is my power of the purse. And I'm going to influence you rather than the lawmaker to do what I say because I will buy this product versus another. So we've crowded our labels with things that consumers are clamoring for, which can raise a lot of confusion when we come to look at it from a regulatory perspective and a policy perspective. On the one hand, consumers are clamoring for the classic freedom from harm, freedom from cheating. But on the other hand, they don't want over-regulation, over-exertion of lawmakers or regulators to be in place. They want that freedom of choice. So the question is, how do we have freedom of choice and freedom from harm and freedom from cheating? The two don't seem to go together very well. And the classic example I've used last week and I'll use again this week is raw milk. We want to be free from the harm of raw milk and in some way free from the cheating of raw milk. If we're going to buy a product, we shouldn't be sick from it. And that's a form of cheating. And the FDA has stepped in and agreed and said the raw milk should not be a product that's on the market. It's both harmful and potentially a way of cheating consumers. But there are a community of people who say, I want to be free to make that choice for myself, to assume that risk for my own self based on the information that I receive from whatever sources I receive. Now, that may not speak to us as a society, as a whole, as a majority, but it does speak to certain members of society. So it highlights that confusion where we have freedom of choice and freedom from harm, and sometimes we don't want to be free from harm, or we think that we're assuming a risk we can control. And this idea of societal influence, how do you get 323 million people to agree on an issue? And do we just delegate that decision to an agency to make it for us? Agree or disagree, we've delegated that decision making. Which raises some good questions about societal influence, the sort of mob mentality. Is that good for regulation? Is it good for lawmaking? And when it comes to food safety and food science, is it even scientific? Are we choosing to do something because it actually has statistical significance or has a demonstrated, validated outcome versus something that we just think might work? And we can think of some examples where maybe societal influence is detrimental. And one example is food waste. We have a huge focus in our shopping and our eating of eating and buying food that looks good. It looks like the magazine. It looks like the Instagram. It's pretty. It's blemish-free. It's so slowly that's eroding a little bit with the organic or the natural idea that it's local and it's a little more rustic. But by and large, we want aesthetic food. We've demanded that as a society. And so we see grocery stores who will cull products that look too bruised or that look too damaged or too ununiform to be included in the marketplace. We have expiration dates that maybe could be extended a little bit longer, or sell-by dates that could be extended longer, because these products could be shelf stable, but we're being protective to make sure. Maybe that's not aesthetic, maybe that's more food safety, but some of it could be aesthetic. The result of that focus on aesthetic is a lot of food waste. And there could be other things we do with that food. There could be ways that we use it better. So maybe that's an example of societal influence focusing on the aesthetics of food at the detriment of the use of food. Another example is gluten-free. Gluten-free, prior to the FDA's rulemaking, was a huge marketing fad. Everyone wanted to be gluten-free. It was the new healthy diet. It was the way everyone wanted to eat. And it still is a very predominant on the marketplace, which if you have celiac disease can be very confusing. What product is genuinely gluten-free and what product is gluten-free on the label but actually would cause a reaction with a celiac condition. which caused the FDA to step in and say we need to have clarity for those people with celiac so that they don't have that allergic reaction, so we can protect them from that harm. The question is that a good use of resources? Has society influenced companies to put this on labels and influence the FDA to come in and regulate it in a way to protect from harm? So we're demanding one thing from companies. We're demanding that they tell us this gluten-free product is on the market because we want to buy it. And we're demanding from the FDA that we need to be protected from harm. And what we've done is maybe wasted agency resources. Have we wasted time from the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition by dedicating time and effort to this new rule, or to the enforcement side in the Office of Regulatory Affairs to dedicate time in enforcing these claims? Could that time have been used on other projects? Did societal influence on companies and the FDA maybe squander resources or time? It's a good question. And it points to a bigger question of how do we decide what causes harm? And we've talked about it in the course so far. We are a reactive legal system. We have an issue on the market and we respond to it with a law that corrects it. And we don't necessarily give that a lot of thought or a lot of time to give it thought when we're doing that. We just react and we fix it. And an example is with the 1906 Act, one of the things Upton Sinclair shed light on, and what came to light through that process of protest, was that the facilities were full of rodents, full of despicable conditions with insects and all sorts of things going on. So we had this huge emphasis in the 1906 Act to clean things up. We didn't give any thought to how we cleaned it up, what we used to clean it up. We just wanted these facilities to be rodent-free, pest-free, and clean. And the result was the National Academy of Sciences found one of the results of the 1906 Act was a huge use of pesticides. And Americans from 1906 to 1960, when we had the pesticide amendments, were eating huge amounts of pesticide residue. So we reacted to a situation and came up with a solution. Society demanded that we fix a problem. Congress acted and gave us the 1906 Act. And the result was we ate a lot of pesticides in that period of time. Is that a good result? Is it a better result? Could we have been better off in 1905 than we were in 1930? It's a point of debate and something to talk about as we look at the societal influence. Society demanding an outcome, Congress rapidly acting to fix a solution, mass amount of deaths occurring from consuming a food additive, or the Upton Sinclair situation where we see the situation of how our food is made and reacting. And it raises a question of how do we identify harm? Is it speculative? Is it concrete? We see that with the Delaney amendments. We see that with other amendments. Are we really addressing speculative harm to appease the public, or are we addressing concrete harm? And do we use this term harm and risk too loosely? Have we become sort of numb to that as a society? And when we talk about what do we want as a society, what are we looking for to influence companies or the FDA or government in general, it's more than just food safety. Ultimately, yes, it is about protection from harm, protection from cheating, and those are our twin concerns as we started the lecture to talk about. But it's also about making sure people have access to food. So food deserts, that's sort of a topic that is talked about these days. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program for people that can't afford food. Farm Bill to ensure that people will continue to be interested in growing in agriculture so we have a supply of food. The agricultural marketing services from the USDA that ensure people that get into farming have resources in advertising their products and being able to make a living out of farming. We can't all just consume. There needs to be producers as well, and it's important to have domestic production. And so these pieces come together, as well as the idea of workers' rights. We see a little bit of that in the fair trade side, where we're demanding fair trade when we have imported product. But it's just as important on the U.S. side, the domestic side, that we have workers' rights here. So fair wages, fair working conditions. Obviously, that is much better today than it was in 1906 or even into the 30s and 50s, where we saw the cancer rates from color additives and some different things really having a huge effect in the decision to ban some of those additives in place. So worker rights are better, but still an issue we want to think about in food safety. We want to make sure that the conditions that our workers are in are good conditions. So there's a lot of issues that we can think about outside of protection from harm and protection from cheating. So in the last slide, what I want to talk about is not what do we want, but how do we get it? And we'll extend this into the discussion board, but there are really two components, and I've alluded to one of them through the lecture. But one of them is, who do we influence? And ultimately, we have an influence of companies or an influence of government, either the FDA or Congress. And the next follow-up question is, how do we influence that person or that company? And we can talk about a myriad of ways that we do that. We have the power of the purse. We can boycott. We can make purchasing decisions to influence companies to act one way or the other. That economic influence is huge. We also have the classic methods of influencing government, lobbying, call your congressman, protest, marching, and so forth. So that's where we're going to take the discussion board, is effective methods of influence. What person responds best? Is it a company? Is it Congress? And that's where we're going to take this discussion.